It was just a few days ago that we saw the vice president in the region trying to fortify, keep in place this very fragile ceasefire. How does this announcement from the prime minister stand to jeopardize that? How are you thinking about sort of what this means and what's likely to come next?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing to consider is that this ceasefire has been very fragile from the very beginning. Both of the parties, it took so long to get to a ceasefire because both parties really had a vested interest in extending the conflict. And so it is against that backdrop and a lot of stubborn diplomacy by the Trump administration that you reached the point that you did. But I think this reinforces that the mediators to this, not just the United States, but on the Hamas side, certainly need pressure from Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, and others in order to keep this in place. It is very fragile indeed, and certainly the outbreak in violence is just the latest in the ceasefire violations.
Earlier today, I spoke with Matt Whitaker, the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to NATO, and I asked him about what we saw here, this news, and here's what he had to say.
We got, all the living hostages were returned home, and that was obviously a very important moment in this dispute and this war. But we'll just have to watch it. I think, the people of Gaza want peace. It's only Hamas that is the problem. And so, Israel has certainly a right to defend itself, and we'll just have to see what additional pressure and additional opportunities the world can bring to make sure that Hamas is not hostile and doesn't continue to, wreak havoc in the Gaza Strip.
On the pressures and opportunities, it strikes me that when this deal was announced, this is what was inchoate, sort of how the world was going to deal with Hamas as Israel moved out of Gaza. Your sense of what pressure can be applied here and how difficult it's going to be to see a more peaceful Gaza as you have elements of Hamas still existing within that territory?
So at the beginning, this was ultimately a ceasefire agreement. The president has called this a peace agreement, but the reality is phase one was in fact a ceasefire. And if that's going to hold, then I think the parties have to move very quickly to phase two, and that includes fulfilling obligations on both sides. And so certainly Ambassador Whitaker is correct that Hamas is a problem here. But I think, the Palestinians would also say that there have been violations, and certainly the violence that we saw today went both directions. So I do think that in order for this to hold, you're going to have to really move forward with the overall peace agreement, and that is being able to start a reconstruction effort in Gaza, allow people to return to homes. Something like 93% of Gazans are unhoused or underhoused. The aid is, continues to be relatively slow getting in, and so, in both directions, I think there's got to be real progress towards improving lives for the Gazans themselves, but also then in conjunction with that moving towards real disarmament of Hamas. And that is going to take, you noted the effort by Vice President Vance. Marco Rubio was there. The U.S. is really leaning on the Israelis, and Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and other Arab partners really need to apply that same pressure to Hamas.
We have about a minute left. I'm just curious of what you'll be watching for, so just kind of assess the likelihood that the ceasefire holds. What are you watching for? What's going to indicate its viability going forward?
Well, I'm watching Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition. The ceasefire was not necessarily something that they wanted. They would like to continue operations against Hamas. And so what I'm really watching for is what the pressure continues to be from the United States administration, really holding the Israeli feet to the fire, and then likewise on Hamas. And can you, things like the attacks on the IDF at the Rafah, in Rafah City, that has to stop. And so the Arab partners really need to apply all of that pressure in order for this to hold.
You're optimistic that's going to happen?
I am optimistic that this administration is fully committed to this ceasefire and will do what needs to be done for it to move forward. So I must say I'm a bit more optimistic than I would have been just a few weeks ago.
And I'm very curious, do you think celebrations were premature about what this means for the Middle East more broadly, this ceasefire? You talked about it kind of in discrete terms. Yeah, you do.
I do. I think it's quite premature. This is a decades-long conflict. There's a long way to go. I do think that, if you put this agreement in the context of broader normalization potential between Arab states and Israel, everybody has incentive to make this work long term. But there is an awful lot of work to be done, not least of which, the very, very basic humanitarian requirements as a starting point, and then reducing the violence in the West Bank as well. So there's a long way to go.